What a spectacular view of downtown Los Angeles from the 6th Street Viaduct, which is going under a makeover right now to look a whole lot different. Did you know there is such a thing as tree equity? Let me say it again, tree equity. That's right, that's a term. The city of LA is working on it. They're trying to keep an equitable amount of trees in wealthier parts of town, poorer parts of town, and in those poorer parts of town, there sometimes are less. And it's actually a big deal. Not only do trees provide shade and clean the air, but a recent study shows that people who live in neighborhoods with a lot of trees are healthier. Research shows they are less likely to have a heart attack or a stroke. We want to talk to Greg Potts right now. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer and Assistant Director of the Bureau of Street Services. Hello, Greg. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and I just said a whole lot there. Explain it to me. You can get a heart attack because you don't have enough trees in your neighborhood?
Well, there are both physical and mental health benefits to having trees in your neighborhood. There's, maybe 10 million trees in LA, of which about 700,000 are planted along streets. And it's those street trees that my agency maintains, the Bureau of Street Services. And we're currently doing a comprehensive inventory of those 700,000 street trees and about 300,000 vacant planting locations, so that we'll know all the places where we could plant a new tree.
I got to ask you, first of all, who counted those 700,000 trees? And is there really an inequity between richer and poorer parts of town?
Yes, there really is inequity in our tree canopy. We've hired professional arborists from a contractor to not only just count the trees, but measure them, identify the species, provide an exact location, and diagnose any health issues with the trees. So we're going to have a comprehensive record of the health of each of our street trees. They've covered about 400,000 of the 700,000. And as you can see, you can access this data on a tablet. So my staff who goes out to inspect or work on a tree will be able to look up the information about that tree right there in the field. If you get a map of tree canopy across the city, it looks like a map of redlining from the 1930s. The neighborhoods that were redlined in the 1930s, where it was difficult to get loans to buy a home or upgrade your property, those are tree-poor neighborhoods today. And it's even more serious than ever because the city's warming. We have warm neighborhoods that currently have 30 to 40 days a year where there's a peak temperature of 95 degrees or higher. That's going to go to 100 days a year by 2040 to 2050. So we have to start addressing the inequitable distribution of trees. And really, for the first time, we're going to have comprehensive information on the street tree population in each of our 99 neighborhood council areas.
I have to ask you, and I don't mean to take this off to a side road, but do you think, is there anything in your research that shows that that was deliberate, that richer parts of town got better landscaping than poorer parts of town? Was that by some design?
That's a great question. You know, most of the trees that have been planted both along streets and in private property were planted by private entities. The city didn't plant most of the trees. So in neighborhoods where you could finance opening a subdivision, by a large developer, like Hancock Park, for example, those neighborhoods were heavily planted with trees, both along the streets and in the on the yards of the properties. And you can see that today. And then other neighborhoods where that kind of financing wasn't available because of federal redlining policy, it became much harder to invest in infrastructure of all sorts, and fewer trees were planted. It also takes, time and money to care for trees, especially in the first 5 years after they're established. It actually costs us more money to water the tree for the 3-year establishment period than it does to plant it. So, providing enough resources so the trees that are planted can establish and become healthy is an equity issue also.
So as you go through parts of town, and I wonder if you could sort of say some of the parts of town that need trees, that were inequitably treated with canopies. Do the people in the neighborhoods get to pick the kind of tree they want, or is this just the city goes out and gets whatever it thinks is appropriate for our climate?
We work with communities to choose the right tree for the right place. Often there's several different tree species that would fit that particular parkway configuration or tree well, and we work with the community to figure out which of the appropriate species they would like to have. For example, there are neighborhood councils in South Los Angeles where you might have 20% of the spaces have palm trees in them, which provide no shade at all. And then another maybe 30 to 40% are empty. So, in a neighborhood in South LA, there may only be half of the available spaces have a shade tree in them. In a really leafy, tree-rich area, on the west side or Hancock Park or some of the tree-rich parts of the San Fernando Valley, it could be that 70 to 80% of the tree locations have a shade tree in them. And then also the size of the trees is important too. Often the more privileged areas have older growth, larger trees with bigger canopies. And some of the underserved neighborhoods, even when they do have a shade tree, it's not quite as big and shade producing.
Well, Greg Spott, thanks so much. I mean, it's enlightening to hear a lot of this. I can't help but think back to that poem I learned in elementary school, something like, I think I'll never see anything as lovely as a tree. And now you've just added a whole lot of images to my mind with that poem. And thanks so much for being with us. Fox 11 News In Depth returns right after this.